The good times are when you've got to be the asshole. The good times are when everyone feels great about what they're doing. That's when you've got to come down really hard on your team. And it feels nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. Like, they're doing great. They're amazing. Our mobility business, which was our cash cow, lost 85% of its volume overnight. It's the job of the leader to some extent to go against the grain. It was a little lesson for me. I remember this is not the first tough time for Uber. Right, like I think
we're going to get back to that.
Yeah, like tough times is just kind of what we do. It's like a Thursday, and the much tougher time, frankly, for us than where we are now was post-pandemic. Our mobility business, which was our cash cow, lost 85% of its volume overnight, within the context of we were losing $2.5 billion anyway. So I had some friends who were like profitable businesses that lost a bunch of their volume. We were deeply unprofitable and lost a bunch of volume. And I knew we had to make some tough calls. And I really wanted my team to be bought in. So we would get together on Zoom over and over, talk about what we have to do here and there. And one of the exchanges that I had with my CFO, Nelson Che, that still sticks with me is, we're talking in circles all over. Nelson's like, Dara, just tell us what you want to do. Like, we'll do it. You don't need to ask our opinion and all this. Like, tell us, it's during the tough times, your team needs leadership. You've got to assume that mantle. Once Nelson told me that, I was like, all right, let's go. And I took input, but I started leading, and this is not something that you do all the time because you want your team involved. You got to be top down, and you've got to solve for speed, and you've got to solve for decisiveness. Because even if you're decisive and you make 20%, if you make a decision that's 20% off, it's better than being indecisive and not doing anything. So there's this push and pull, which is during easier times, I'm much more consultative. During tough times, I'm much more hardcore. And my team kind of knows that now. They understand once in a while I'm just going to come, we're just going to go, and we're solving for speed. The second part that I would say is, and this isn't just during tough times, is it's the job of the leader to some extent to go against the grain. And it's very easy for a leader during good times. You become the cheerleader, everything's fine. Like, the good times are when you've got to be the asshole. The good times are when everyone feels great about what they're doing, they lose discipline, they think they're terrific. That's when you've got to come down really hard on your team. And it feels nonsensical, it doesn't make sense. Like, they're doing great, they're amazing. That is not the time for you to be a cheerleader at all. And on the other side, it's during the tough times when you've got to start being the cheerleader. And you've got to make assessment of your team, your situation, et cetera. So if you have a team member who's not a wartime person, move them out. That's a separate decision. Yep. But once you assess that your team is the right team, they're around you, that's when you really have to lift them up. And it's really hard because, like, at the end of every day, you're like, oh my God, this is so terrible. But then when you wake up that morning and you get together with your team, it feels weird a little bit because you don't want to come off as like too optimistic and not recognizing there's this duality of like understanding the reality and be like, we can do this. Come on, we can do this. Let's go. And it's tricky because your team has to understand that you're like staring at that black hole. Yeah. But then you're like, we got this. Yeah. And then really lift up that team because believe me, if you feel like crap, they're feeling like crap, they need you to lift them up.
Yep. And on the pandemic, now having gone through it and picked up some of the kind of structured principles the way that you do as a leader, if you were given like a magical phone that you'd call yourself the day where the pandemic bomb dropped, what would you tell yourself to do differently?
Definitely go faster. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is something I tell myself all the time as it relates to people in terms of decision making. We moved quickly, but we could have moved a bit quicker. And then it goes to the biases that I talked about. If the right thing to do is to, let's say, cut 25% of your staff, and we cut 25% of our staff, it was terrible. You'll convince yourself that the right number is 15. You'll convince yourself that, well, I'll do 10, see what happens, etc. And you may not have the luxury to see what happens. And so I would say move faster and don't mollify the tough calls.
Yep.
Ultimately, when we made the cuts, we did go in deeply. It took me too long to get there. It took way too many restless nights, way too many sleepless nights, and you know, while the end product, I think we handled it well, we just took too long.